This is the Living Vertizontal Podcast, brought to you by The Church at Riverstone, a fellowship of the Church of the Nazarene in Madera, California. We are a podcast that discusses the intersection of Scripture and our lives. Together, we continue the conversation that was started each preceding Sunday morning in our worship gathering.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick.
And I'm Natasha.
And we are the Living Vertizontal Podcast with you this week as we continue this journey that we have been on through the Gospel of Luke. As a quick reminder for those of you who were able to tune in last week, we said goodbye to Derek and Brittany, who have been on this podcast with us since the beginning. And it's been just under 3 years with them. And so it's a sad goodbye. But
also exciting.
Yeah, exciting for them, to see what happens next. So I guess for now, you get Natasha and I as the dynamic duo on this instead of the Fantastic Four that it had been before. And we'll kind of see where things go. And so in addition to saying our farewells to Derek and Brittany, we also finished with the 7th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, looking at verses 36 through 50. And in this passage, Jesus was invited over to Simon, the Pharisee's house, and was encountered by the sinful woman. Together, we again discussed the role of dependence in our lives and the importance of our undivided dependence on Jesus in everything that we do. When our dependence is divided among multiple things, we find anxiety and fear. But when our dependence is focused on Jesus alone, despite the uncertainty around us, we can find true peace, much like the sinful woman found at the end of the passage. This week, we're going to be moving on into Luke chapter 8, looking at Luke 8, 1 through 15. In this passage, we read of the involvement of women in Jesus' ministry and also encounter Jesus' parable of the sower and its explanation to his disciples. We have Natasha reading for us today. So Natasha, could you read Luke chapter 8, verses 1 through 15?
Yes. Luke chapter 8, verse 1. Soon afterward, Jesus traveled from one town and village to another, preaching and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, as well as some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, Joanna, the wife of Herod's household manager, Chuza, Susanna, and many others. These women were ministering to them out of their own means. While a large crowd was gathering and people were coming to Jesus from town after town, he told them this parable. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was sowing, some seed fell along the path, where it was trampled and the birds of the air devoured it. Some fell on rocky ground, and when it came up, the seedlings withered because they had no moisture. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up with it and choked the seedlings. Still, other seed fell on good soil, where it sprang up and produced a crop 100-fold. As Jesus said this, he called out, "He who has ears, let him hear." Then his disciples asked him what this parable meant. He replied, "The knowledge of the mysteries of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to others I speak in parables, so that, though seeing, they may not see, though hearing, they may not understand. Now this is the meaning of the parable. The seed is the word of God. The seeds along the path are those who hear, but the devil comes and takes away the word from their hearts, so that they may not believe and be saved. The seeds on rocky ground are those who hear the word and receive it with joy, but they have no root. They believe for a season, but in the time of testing, they fall away. The seeds that fell among the thorns are those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by the worries, riches, and pleasures of this life, and their fruit does not mature. But the seeds on good soil are those with a noble and good heart, who hear the word, cling to it, and by persevering, produce a crop.
All right. Thank you for reading that for us today, Natasha. As we go into this conversation, before we actually get to our passage for today, I I feel like I want to make a callback because this passage begins with a statement about the heading in our midweek meditations for verses 1-3 is women minister to Jesus. And so as a part of what we invite people to work through in the midweek meditations is getting to know these women and just what this might be communicating. But before we even get to this passage, there was something that arose within me out of something that you said earlier, Natasha, before we even sat down to record the show. And it was a callback to last week's passage and how the sinful woman essentially was the first one in the Gospel of Luke that Luke mentions as being a woman who is ministering to Jesus. And I don't think I had ever put these, like today's passage and last week's passage, together like that, because I've always held them apart. They're divided by a title. But when you remove that title, you see this continuity where it's not like these 3 verses are some random appendage that are thrown in, but it is in line with the story that we see that Jesus is unfolding as he is helping communicate and demonstrate what this upside down kingdom looks like. And this woman, this sinful woman from that ministered to Jesus in the midst of Simon's house, the Pharisee's house, like for all intents and purposes, she had no right to be there. She shouldn't have been there. She wasn't necessarily invited, though there may have been some communal opportunity for her to be there because it was a community event. When people threw parties like this or had dinners, it was generally understood that others may show up. So in a way, maybe she had a backdoor in, but at the same time, like she is a sinful woman. And so from like a purity law conversation, from a like worship conversation, the Pharisees would have never wanted somebody like this anywhere around them. They wouldn't have wanted to come in contact with them because it could have nullified their, like what they should have been doing in their responsibilities. So she had no right to be there. And yet Jesus permitted her presence, and more than just permitting her presence, allowed her, and in a sense invited by virtue of him not dismissing her, invited her to minister to him. And that's just crazy.
Yeah, I think that we've been talking a lot about how Luke is working to redefine who is in the kingdom, who is this children of the promise, right? Who are the children of Abraham? Who is this Israel? Who are all these people that are inheritance or that have an inheritance in God's kingdom? Mm-hmm. And I think it's becoming more and more clear as we work through the Gospel of Luke that this kingdom is a lot bigger than what we set out in anticipation of.
No doubt.
At least it's a lot bigger than what I know that the Jews of the day would have anticipated this kingdom to include.
Definitely bigger than what the Pharisees thought, and definitely bigger than what the general Jew would have thought.
Absolutely. And so, this week's passage kind of continues on with that narrative. And as you're talking about these women that are ministering, so very much like the woman who poured out her perfume on Jesus's feet, much like that woman, these women are also working to minister to Jesus and his disciples, and they're doing it by using their own means, is right. What the passage tells us. And so this tells us that these women are among some of the more wealthy or the well-to-do in this particular community at the time. And if we take a moment and kind of look at each one of these up close. So first we have Mary Magdalene. She's the first one emphasized. And I kind of always thought Magdalene like meant something, turns out, no, that's not the case. Magdalene is just an indicator that this is where she's from. So you can think of it like Jesus of Nazareth. This is Mary of Magdala. And so Mary Magdalene, and this is just, Magdala is just a location. We're working all around the Sea of Galilee right now. So this is just a location on the west coast of Sea of Galilee. So not from necessarily far away, kind of local to the area that Jesus is traveling around in with his disciples and these women at the time. But Mary, like, we know her story, right? Jesus delivered her from 7 demons, 7 impure spirits. And the number 7 is so significant. We've talked about this before. I think it's mentioned in our midweek meditations as well, that the 7 is the number of completeness. She was completely given over to these demonic spirits, and Jesus completely restored her. And so this is Mary's story, and Mary is courageous. We see her later. Fast forward, she's going to be the first to enter the empty tomb, or to discover the empty tomb. And she's always in this account across the Gospels. She has a role to play, and she's one of the ones who's also mentioned staying at the cross. And so Mary is courageous. We know this about her. We know that she's also had a life of torment and pain dealing with these demons, but she was traumatized, and Jesus healed her. She is the model of healing, and gives her entire life to serve him and his disciples and to further their cause. And then you have Joanna. And Joanna has a completely different story. Joanna is among the wealthy elite. You can kind of think of her as she's the enemy, really. I mean, she should be the enemy, right? She is,
at least lives in enemy territory.
Yeah, she is the wife of Chusa, who is Herod's business manager, right? And it's kind of ironic, really, because Herod is working to kind of destroy the poor. You know, he's building his cities on top of these smaller villages, or where poverty is, and he's pushing people out. Kind of really doing a lot of good work as from a worldly perspective, as Rome would see it. But in the process, just walking over all sorts of people that Jesus really, really cares for, and that his ministry emphasizes. And so it's kind of, it flips the script that Joanna then is taking her resources and her means and her I'm sure some of her husband's means, and funneling them into this ministry of this man who's elevating the very people that are being kind of pushed out and cast down by her husband's boss. And so that she's towing a line here. She must be a very wise woman, but also very determined to do what is right. Again, probably very courageous. And then, so you can think of her as kind of the wealthy elite. And then we have Susanna, and Susanna is more of an unknown influencer. We don't really know much about Susanna. There's a lot of things we can maybe speculate, but I think Susanna is important because what her mentioning here shows us is that oftentimes we hear about, or history seems to point to, the people who are loud, or the people who make big impact. And those are the people who are famous and well known for all of these things. But Susanna is one who serves in more of a silent and subdued role. And Jesus sees and honors these silent sustainers of his ministry. So side kind of devotional thought, I guess, is, if you're one of the people behind the scenes who's working for the kingdom on Jesus's behalf, he sees you. He values you. What you're doing is of utmost importance to building his kingdom. Continue being obedient in your role. We don't have to have all the fame and the spotlight to have a meaningful impact in the world, or to have a meaningful impact for his kingdom. And Susanna is evidence of that. And so I just think you look at these 4 different women, if we go back to last week, and you have this broad spectrum. You have the healed, you have the sinner, or the not yet healed, but the healing in heart, right? You can see the woman from last week, her heart is open and eager to change, and she loves Jesus. She cares for Jesus. And then you have the wealthy, and then you have the quiet. And when you look at this kingdom that Jesus is kind of putting together in this group of followers, that he has, it's really redefining what the people of God encompasses. It includes the common, the bold, the zealous, the outsiders, the academics, the tradesmen, the broken, the sinner, the sick, the imperfect, the rich, the poor. I mean, it has a place for everybody in it. And as Luke is putting together this gospel to present the good news of this kingdom, I mean, this is the picture. We get this picture of Jesus coming in to say, this good news is for everyone. It is for everyone. And that theme is going to continue to be present as we continue to work through the remainder of Luke. But it's definitely present here in our passage for this week as well.
Yeah. And I guess as I think about this idea of, the kingdom being for everyone, and specifically like as it relates to our passage today, it's not just that the kingdom is for everyone in the sense of this is a sphere in which you can exist, but this is a sphere in which you can impact change, right? Like these women are ministering to Jesus out of their means. Last week, that woman ministered to Jesus out of her own means, like with the alabaster jar. Like they are actively participating in the furthering, in the expansion of the kingdom. And so it's not just this passive presence, but it's an active reality that yes, this kingdom is for everyone, and everyone is for for the working within this kingdom. And so as I think about that, like even today, I think we and maybe we as like church people probably should hear this message from the position of somebody like Simon from last week. People within the establishment, in a matter of speaking, should hear this reality that in Jesus's kingdom, everybody has a place where they can participate. It is not just for the people who have everything together, everything cleaned up. I mean, you have Mary Magdalene, yes, who was totally delivered from the demons. But before that happened, she wasn't, and she was totally given over to evil in her life. And Jesus comes to her and invites her and heals her, restores her, and now she's participating. You have Joanna, who, as you pointed out, is like a woman behind enemy lines. Like she, in a way, could represent a member of the opposing empire. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like you did a very good job explaining the clash of empires that's taking place here, where Jesus represents this one kingdom, and then Herod Antipas is a figurehead of the other kingdom that is at odds with the kingdom of heaven that Jesus is bringing in. And Joanna lives in that kingdom that is in complete opposition to Jesus. And Jesus doesn't say, move out of that kingdom and then you can come in and be a part of what we're doing. No.
She exists in the in-between.
You have a place here. And then it goes further with Susanna, and there's this ambiguity that exists. Like, who is Susanna? We don't know. Well, I think there's some beauty there, because that permits a reader to say, well, obviously, I'm not somebody who's living in enemy territory, and I wasn't totally possessed by demons, but there's this other person who's like the unknown. I'm kind of like I'm like the unknown. I don't know where I necessarily fit, but the reality of it is, even when we don't necessarily know where we fit, Jesus says, this is where you fit. You are welcome here. And so I feel like we need to constantly remember this as people come into our places of worship, as people come into our communities that are supposed to be like representations of this inbreaking kingdom, pockets of this inbreaking kingdom all over the world. We need to remember that everybody has a place, not just to passively like sit, but to actively participate in this inbreaking of the kingdom. They may not even fully understand what they're doing. We probably won't even fully understand what they're doing. But as they participate, as they're looking at Jesus, he can use them to allow his kingdom to break forth. And so I guess this begs the question, if this kingdom is for everybody, then why is it that Jesus speaks in such a way that only some understand.
Yeah, I wrestle with this question a little bit as well. And I know this isn't the first parable we've encountered, so we've
Sure.
had to kind of address this or come to terms with this reality. And we've talked about some ideas about it already. But I was kind of thinking back to when Jesus didn't speak in parables, when Jesus used the technique of direct confrontation to point out, like, to convict somebody. And it didn't go well. They wanted to throw him off a cliff. Like, if we go back to where we talked, we go back to the very, towards the beginning of his ministry, according to the Gospel of Luke. They're wanting to get rid of this guy who is calling them out. And so, Jesus has something to accomplish. And so perhaps, in order for his time to come, he's constantly saying, kind of strange things about, well, my time has not yet come. My time has not yet come, or the time will come. And so Jesus, recognizing how limited his time is to teach, shape, instruct, to reach all of these people, to redefine what the kingdom is, has to speak in such a way so as to invite the people who are earnestly seeking growth, earnestly seeking to understand in a new way, who have a taste of the new kingdom and want to know more. It's these people that he's trying to teach and instruct. I think the people whose hearts are hardened, he recognizes that those are going to be the ones maybe that this moment of him teaching, it's going to take more than this. And he doesn't have this much time. His followers will have this much time. And I don't think that, God is comfortable giving up on anyone. And so I would never say, well, Jesus is just like, oh, well, I'm writing them off. I can't get with that. But right now maybe is not the time to call conviction in their lives, but still it is a time to proclaim the good news of the kingdom of heaven to those who are earnestly seeking it, who aren't trying to trap him, who aren't trying to trip him up, who aren't trying to throw him over a cliff or nail him to a cross, but to those people whose hearts are softened, who are ready to receive the teaching, instruction, and shaping that Jesus is ready to offer.
Yeah, as I think about what you were just saying in this idea of parables and how, it's a way to teach and instruct and to expose. That's not, maybe, I guess the word that kept coming into my mind is, it's not so aggressive in its confrontation, right? There's still a confrontation. We've talked before about how parables hold up a mirror for us, and they expose things about us as if we are seeking, right, to be exposed. And so
if we're willing to look in the mirror,
and so it's not that Jesus is just, refusing to address things like you say. It's just he's doing it in a different way, and I would say he's doing it in a more delicate way. And as I think about that, because Jesus does care about everybody, because God doesn't want to shut the door on anybody, and recognizing the short amount of time that he actually does have, by doing this, exposing via a parable where it's a little bit softer, where it's a little bit gentler, rather than a direct, you're wrong in this situation, rather than slamming the door in people's faces and them completely becoming militant, like what we saw in Nazareth. Instead, there might be people who still are dismissing what he is saying. So they're just like, yeah, I don't understand. I'm not here to try to learn from you, and you're speaking nonsense, so I'm out. It's more of a dismissive kind of feel rather than an outright opposition to type feel. And so I feel like the parable serves this purpose of leaving the door open.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For those that are hearing, that have ears to hear, there is life change happening. But for those who don't have ears to hear what they're saying and might be seeing, but they're not really perceiving what's going on, the door is not shut on them. They just don't understand right now.
Right.
There is still a potential down the line. And so recognizing that Jesus speaking in parables is not about exclusivity, but this overwhelming desire to include anybody and everybody, we then move into this parable for the day and talk about what's going on in this parable of the sower. It's a very familiar parable of Jesus's parables, but what's going on?
So we've talked about how parables hold up this mirror. And so with that mirror, usually there's some sort of question that I'm trying to ask myself. And so my question this week reading the parable was, well, what type of soil am I?
I'd imagine probably the question that Jesus was hoping people were asking as they listened.
Right. And so as you know, I begin wrestling with this, I just kind of feel Jesus prompting me to be humble, to remain humble, ready to learn always, ready to receive always, so that I can be in that group of people who can hear the question he's trying to ask, right? Because there's this whole group of people that are too distracted by other things, or too stuck on tradition, or too stuck thinking they know better, that they can't hear Jesus's question. And so I just, I hear Jesus just asking me, hey, be open, be humble, be ready to hear my questions, and be expecting that it's going to be upside down. So it's going to feel different from everything you think you know.
That's so good because, in thinking about this, I, as well as I work through my midweek meditations, right? One of the questions that we invite people into answering is like, what question do you hear Jesus asking you? And that was the question that I too came to, right? Like, what soil am I? What soil are you, Nick? What do you think? And I think if we come to these parables, if we come to this encounter with Jesus where we're listening to what he has to say, if we come to this humbly, you see, Jesus is not calling out like, if you're this soil X, then there's no hope, but only if you're soil Y is there hope. He's talking about the consequences that are associated with different types of soil. He's talking about what might result if you are the soil that has rocks, if you are the soil that has thorns versus if you are the good soil. But he's not necessarily breathing condemnation on this. And so as I hear him ask this question, and when I'm coming to this humbly and honestly, if I recognize that maybe I'm in a place where, my life is kind of resembling the soil that has rocks in it. Because it's like every time something comes up, it's so distracting from my ability to focus on Jesus that it just robs me of everything as it pertains to my relationship with him. And I just become over focused on that. Like, if I can acknowledge that I'm in that place now, again, in this humble conversation, I can begin to move to the next question, which is, Jesus, what can I do? How can you help me get from this place of recognizing that I am that soil that has rocks in it to the good soil? Because I want to be that good soil.
Well, I think that's the important thing to recognize is the soil of your life is dynamic. Just because you're good soil today doesn't mean you're going to be good soil 5 years from now, right? It doesn't mean you're going to be good soil 2 weeks from now. And just
because you have thorny soil or rocky soil today doesn't mean that tomorrow it's not going to be good.
Absolutely. I think that remember, this is a call to change. It's a call to soften. It's a call to evaluate. It's a call to look in the mirror. And that's all that Jesus is hoping to bring to our lives is transformation of our soil. He doesn't want to leave us in a place destined for destruction.
Right.
Like the seedling in all of these difficult, trying
situations.
Yeah. Jesus wants to till the soil. He wants to help us to be good soil.
Right. So this is going to go what may seem tangential, but for some reason it's very connected in my mind. And I think it's something that needs to be said. I was wrestling with it as you were talking, but as I think about this, we already talked about what the purpose of the parables were, right? To hold up a mirror, not to hold up a magnifying glass at somebody else. And I think for me, as you were just now talking, it was like I was hearing Jesus say, don't forget, I'm not describing the different kinds of soil that exist so you could look at other people's lives and call them out on where they're at. I'm talking about where things are at so that way you can examine and you can work on it, and you and me together can do that. But I'm not speaking in this parable to hold up a magnifying glass. I'm holding up a mirror. So remember what the purpose is of what we're talking about here.
This is one of the things actually that I feel like Jesus and I talked about while I was working through the midweek meditations this week, is that, he was pointing out to me, like, so we are soil, yes, but then we also have this role of like seed scatterer, right?
Mm-hmm.
As proclaimers of the good news, we also kind of find ourselves in this role of farmer a little bit, partnering with Jesus on his mission.
100%.
And so when I kind of shifted and thought from that perspective, I just felt Jesus, like, I think probably, let me say it. I just felt Jesus communicating to me, hey, make sure you're looking at the heart when you're looking for good soil to pour into. Make sure that you're not looking at the fruit. And man, I thought back to, where this passage started, or where we were last week, and the types of people that Jesus is including as insiders in his kingdom. And they do not have it together. Their lives are not bearing good fruit necessarily.
Right.
Some of them, sure, right? But some of them not. Like when Jesus met Mary Magdalene, there was not a lot of fruit there.
Or
right?
the
Not a lot of
woman in Simon's house
not a lot of good fruit there.
Right.
But Simon jumps to this conclusion by judging her fruit.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesus is saying, no, I want you to judge the soil. I want you to look with me into their soil, because as we look at people's soil, as we see their heart, all the mistakes, all the flaws, they become so minimal, because deep down is a heart that is longing desperately to be loved, to be known by their creator, to just be encouraged. And for a variety of reasons, right? Like all of life's circumstances, all these thorns that we experience, they cause, or we allow them to cause, all of this bad fruit in our lives. But there's never a point where Jesus says, like, no, like it's too much bad fruit, throw it out, right? And so Jesus, I just felt calling me to really look into the soil of people's heart, as I'm looking to disciple and to pour into people, not necessarily to focus on the fruit. Because as we focus on the soil and tilling the soil, as a good farmer does, then eventually the good fruit will follow.
Yeah, I think, again, as you were talking, this thought comes to my mind. All soil has the potential to be good soil. Even the rocky soil has the potential to be good soil if the rocks are removed. The thorny soil has the potential to be good soil if the thorns are removed. And so we just have to allow the farmer to till the soil. And I know I agree with you. Like, in a matter of speaking, Jesus has invited us into participation, which we kind of become pseudo farmers with him. At the same time, he regularly says, he multiple times says in scripture that, man looks on the outside, but I look on the inside. And so there's this different ability that Jesus has, and he is able to see people for who they are, for the good soil that they are, because they have been created in his image. Now, there might be thorns, there might be rocks, but he sees the good soil that exists, and he invites us to see that as well. And as I look at these different classifications of the soil, whether it's the seed that lands on the path, or the seed that lands in the rocky soil, or the thorny soil, or then the good soil, like the theme that I see running through each of these is either a lack of dependence or dependence on the Father, or on Jesus. And this is a theme that has been running for a while now, But like, when you think about seed falling on a path, those are people who they hear the message and they just completely dismiss it. They have zero dependence whatsoever. When you think about the seed that falls in the rocky soil, like they're like, yeah, this is good. We can resonate with this. This resonates with us. But then as soon as hard times come, they go running back to that other stuff that they used to cling to or depend on. And rather than walking forward in dependence on Jesus, they embrace all that other stuff. And then you have the thorny people, you have the thorny soil, which, these are the people who also hear the message, and it's an exciting message. And again, it resonates with them. But then as soon as like they're confronted with the things that this world has to offer, they become enamored with them. And rather than continue to persist in their dependence on him, they begin to give themselves over to those things in the world. And so you have these first three that demonstrate a lack of total dependence on God, on Jesus. But then you have this final one that embraces full dependence, that recognizes in the midst of everything, regardless of anything, I am dependent on him. And it's, as you pointed out earlier, that comes with a heart that is humble, recognizing that I can't do this on my own. I can't run and fix this situation, this rocky situation. I can't run and find value by clinging to this item. It is simply at your feet, Jesus, where I find that value. So I have to humbly come and humbly depend on you. And so I guess in all of this, we see this continuation of this conversation of who's welcome in his kingdom, of what it looks like to participate in this kingdom. You have this humility, this dependence. Everybody's welcome as you live into this humility and this dependence. And so today, as we work through this conversation, perhaps the invitation is to allow Jesus to hold up a mirror and allow him to ask us, what soil are you? And then as you begin to understand maybe where you lie in this continuum of what soil you are, maybe the follow-on question is, okay, Jesus, what do you want to do in me to help me be that good soil? What do you need to do in me to help me be that good soil?
As you journey with us, we recommend purchasing Midweek Meditations, A Journey Through Luke, Part 2, which is available for purchase on Amazon. Also, be sure to follow the Living Vertizano podcast to stay current on all our new releases. To learn more about the Church at Riverstone, visit us at thechurchatriverstone.org.